Beautiful. All right. Welcome, everybody. Um, Welcome to this webinar on climate asset management, climate resilience and asset management, brought to you by the LGA Climate Partnerships and Resilient South and a number of other councils, including City of Port Adelaide, Enfield and Charles Sturt. Just wanted to acknowledge that we're meeting on traditional owners, recognise the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and just recognise the cultural heritage and importance of land, country, and sky to the Aboriginal people today, from wherever you are joining us today for this webinar. We are going to get started pretty quickly. We have three presentations today. Firstly, Stefan Kadri-Retallick from Regional Coordinator for Resilient South will be speaking to the Resilient Asset Management Plan pilot project. We have Anna Rogers from the City of Charles Sturt talking to embedding climate risk within asset management processes at that council. And we also have Maggie Hine talking about climate resilient asset management processes, particularly with flooding and coastal resilience mindset with their work with the CSIRO over the years. So thanks for joining. We do have quite a number of people joining us today. There were nearly 100 registrations. So far, 60 are online. I'll ask that you please keep your microphones on mute. We do have a Q&A chat function, a Q&A function or chat function down the bottom where you can post questions to the presenters, and we'll try to get any clarifying questions answered following each presentation, but we'll also hopefully have time at the end for a bit of a Q&A, time permitting, obviously, but we'll see how we go with that. This webinar is being recorded and will be placed up on the Resilient South website, as far as I know. Is that right, Stefan? I think that's what we heard about. So yes, please keep your cameras and microphones off unless you're presenting. Just helps with the recording of this process. So thank you very much. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Stefan Kadri-Retallick. As I mentioned, he's the regional coordinator for Resilient South, and has been involved in the Resilient Asset Management Program pilot program, which was funded through partly funded through the LGA R&D scheme and others. So over to you, Stefan. Thanks, mate.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and thank you to Andrew for doing some of the heavy lifting in helping to organise this. Really appreciate him bringing the audience together and hosting this webinar at the LGA. So much appreciated. Also, of course, like to add my respects to the Kaurna people on whose land I am presenting from today, and the more broadly the Indigenous people across Australia whose land we share. So I will just share my presentation. Does that come up okay? Maggie, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
That's good.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you very much. So today I'm going to be talking about the Resilient Asset Management, or RAMP, pilot project. The RAMP has been a slow burn. It's been part of the Resilient South partnership since I have been coordinator, and that's nearly 5 years now. So it's been a long-term flagship for us. And as we move towards the completion of the first stage of the RAMP, really keen to share that with the sector so that we can all benefit from the process that we've been through. So today I will be covering a little bit about Resilient South for those of you who aren't aware of the partnership, what the RAMP, how it was designed and what it was set out to achieve, what we actually did achieve, and what we learned that can be used by other people who are seeking to go along a similar journey of integrating climate into asset management decisions. And finally, I'll touch on what's next for our partnership. So, Resilient South is a region that most of you would be aware of, based in southern Adelaide, and comprising the cities of Holdfast Bay, Marion, Mitcham, and Onkaparinga. Our councils have been working together with the state government for 15 years on a range of climate adaptation and mitigation projects. We've built a really good reputation for undertaking strategic projects in that space, and our region is roughly a quarter of the area and population of Adelaide, and we're exposed to a really wide range of climate risks. We also have quite a lot of infrastructure assets that we manage on behalf of the community, and they range from the road networks, stormwater infrastructure, libraries, jetties, all of the kind of things that councils are normally managing on behalf of the communities. And region is interesting for a project like this because our partners range from being small and highly urbanised in the case of the city of Holdfast Bay, to very large and peri-urban in the case of Onkaparinga. And that means that the exposure to climate risks varies quite a bit too. And we'd recognise that our community assets underpin the economy and the prosperity of our region. We now have quite a lot of evidence that an increasingly hostile climate will result in more spend to maintain assets as they are, and to renew and or replace them with more robust infrastructure. For example, we know that road surfaces soften in hot weather and then can be eroded during heavy rains or flood. And that might mean that a road surface that we expect to last for, say 30 years actually lasts for substantially less than that, requiring more frequent renewal or upgrading to a tougher surface, or perhaps a change in the way that we use that road. So, for example, limiting heavy vehicle traffic to reduce wear on that road. We also know that much of our peri-urban area is at increased fire risk, which has the potential to damage or destroy infrastructure. That's particularly true in areas where we've got really complex topography, like the Mitcham Hills, and areas of the city of Onkaparinga. And it's easy to imagine how maintaining infrastructure like our road and stormwater infrastructure could become a lot more expensive for councils. And given that councils have a really limited capacity to increase our income, basically through rate increases, which we know are politically not very palatable, this is a major risk for the financial viability of our councils. We also know that roads are particularly important, as Adelaide is a very car-dependent city with limited active transport and public transport options, particularly if you're moving long distances across the cities. And this is what a pretty normal climate event can start to look like on the ground. This photo is from a recent, I think 3 weeks ago, 1 in 15-year storm surge at the boundary of Holdfast Bay and the city of Marion. And we can see here that we've got quite a lot of we've got some storm surge there that's affecting some coastal infrastructure, and we're seeing this more and more, and can expect to see it increasingly based on the current IPCC projections. So what is the RAMP? Several years ago now, each of the Resilient South councils completed the climate risk governance assessment, and asset management was identified out of the 10 areas that are considered as part of the climate risk governance assessments as an area of consistently low performance for our councils. And given that this is where councils spend the majority of our resources, this is a really major deficiency and an area of risk for our councils. So the Resilient Asset Management Project was developed as our first foray into asset management. But as we got started, we realized that this would be a long-term journey, and we ended up reframing the RAMP as a RAMP project as a program, with this initial work being a pilot as our first step in that. By working as a region, we hope that we would be able to lean on each other's strength and develop a consistent approach for our region that could then be used elsewhere in the local government sector. We're aware, of course, that there's a lot of movement of staff between different councils, and there was an idea that a rising tide here could lift all boats, and that by developing a consistent approach, that we would all benefit from that. And it would mean that, particularly when we're talking about networked infrastructure that crosses council boundaries, particularly things like roads and stormwater, having a consistent approach would lead to efficiencies. The pilot was designed to identify our exposure and begin the process of developing approaches that will allow us to maintain our region's resilience. And we thought that could include projecting increased infrastructure spend to maintain current service levels, having a strong financial business case for like for better replacements, including exploring novel funding instruments, identifying the best adaptation options, which could include replacing existing infrastructure with more suitable alternatives over time, or even replacement of infrastructure with alternatives. You know, if we decide that an area is just not suitable for a road in the long term, maybe that's a much more suitable area for a different piece of infrastructure, or relocating that to a different area. And early on, we adapted this tagline of running towards resilience instead of running away from risk, which is where we felt we'd been for a little while. So what did we try to achieve? First step here was assessing asset risk and vulnerabilities. So our participating councils wanted to better understand how our assets were exposed to climate-related risks and vulnerabilities, and what the associated financial implications of these risks were, and what priority risk treatments or resilience building measures are available to us. Then moving into testing information, tools and techniques. So this is exploring what opportunities there are to access or develop new data, tools, systems and knowledge to effectively integrate climate risks into everyday asset management decisions and practices. And we understood that that would be building capacity over time. That wouldn't be an instant process. Then starting to bed down those new approaches into respective asset management systems, plans, finance and risk management frameworks. And we appreciated that each of the councils has a different system and a different series of systems under which this works. But it was hoped that the regional collaboration would enhance efficiency and provide some type of consistency to tackling this complex task. And then finally, showcasing our learnings. We were really clear from the start that Resilient South was in a privileged position in many ways, in that we were able to undertake this work, and we knew that councils across Australia are struggling with it. So we wanted to be able to share our journey and ensure that our peers across the sector can benefit from our pilot and understand what is required to effectively build asset management resilience in the context of a changing climate, and be able to share whatever we can. So we were very fortunate in that we were supported with quite good funding for this project. We initially sought funding from the Local Government Association Research and Development Scheme to design the pilot, and we gained $99,000 to do that work, and then applied and were successful in receiving an additional $250,000 from the Commonwealth National Disaster Risk Reduction Fund to undertake the pilot itself. As a co-contribution to that, each council contributed $59,000 plus extensive staff time. The CSIRO also contributed in-kind support, which I think was valued at $200,000. So the total value, the cash value of the project was $585,000, and it was just shy of $1 million once you consider all of the in-kind benefits, in-kind contributions from councils and the CSIRO. Even as we were designing the pilot, we recognised that even with that funding, we didn't have the resources to do this work completely for ourselves. We knew that our asset management teams were very stretched already, and we had limited coordinating support. So we used this funding to engage an external project manager from URPS, and then engage Oricon as a delivery partner. Both of those consultants were selected after a really protracted engagement process. Both were selected because they had extensive experience in working with local government and were able to demonstrate to us that they were really keen to come on this journey with us, and understood that it was unlikely to be a linear process, that there were going to be a few twists and turns along the way. External project management meant that there was a very close adherence to the project plan as was initially scoped, with limited opportunity to continue to tweak and adjust things. And this is the nature of consultancies, and a limitation of the approach that we took, but there were good reasons for it, and we were limited in that regard. So working with URPS initially, URPS developed a research paper that informed the approach to market for our delivery partner and program design. So that research and recommendations report is available on the Resilient South website. And it goes through a lot of the background and context for undertaking the work, the expected climate impacts, case studies, work that others have undertaken, and a refined process for the pilot. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that report because it's quite comprehensive and useful. The focus then for phase one was to engage stakeholders, communicate the scope and approach of the project, articulate a shared vision for resilient Southern Adelaide, and to develop shared climate scenarios. And this phase was framed as the start of a journey towards shared understanding of why this work was being undertaken. And that might seem like a sort of a late point at which to undertake that work, but it's important to recognise that councils are big beasts, some councils more than others, and starting to make sure that councils are moving together and that teams are moving together in lockstep is really important here, and that requires quite a lot of getting people on the same page. So to help undertake that work, to help get everyone on the same page, we developed a series of scenarios, and these are the scenarios that were developed, and these are based from the IPCC shared social pathways, shared socioeconomic pathways, which replace the previous representative concentration pathways. And these are really useful because they couple the climatic variables or climatic projections with that socio-political element, which is of course inextricably linked to both mitigation and adaptation efforts. The socio-political context is what determines how much we're able to mitigate our carbon emissions, as well as how we are going to respond to increased carbon emissions over time, or the mitigation of those carbon emissions over time. So we developed 4 initially with Oricon. And these are those 4. We found these actually a really useful approach to try and think about what the future might look like. And we ended up narrowing it down to 2. The 2 on the right there, the green path, which was described as kind of Greta Thunberg wins. You know, we have a green future together, and the highway, which focuses on pretty much unchecked carbon emissions and a really ongoing reliance on the fossil fuel systems. The selection of these was informed by a workshop with council staff, including asset and risk planners and sustainability officers, finance officers, the breadth of staff who were involved in asset decision making. And for many, this was the first exposure to the nature of hazards to be explored and formed a foundational experience for the pilot. We got a lot of really positive feedback from this. The workshop also highlighted the different risk and management frameworks in use within each partner council, and they are quite diverse. In our workshop, we were then able to take those assumptions and discuss how each would impact the infrastructure and service delivery within our council. So the primary deliverables were the workshops that led to the development of the phase 1 report, which outlined that shared vision and set the scenarios. So if we now move on to phase 2, I like these animations. So the focus of phase 2 was to assess the physical risks to the selected asset classes within the participating councils. We recognised that there was no way we were going to be able to do this work for all of the assets managed by our 4 councils. And so we selected a small suite of assets to focus on as a test case. All councils considered the implications for road assets against those 2 climate scenarios, and each council selected 1 additional asset class, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. We developed a comprehensive risk register for each council, and those risks range from physical risks, including acute, chronic and compound risks, to transitional risks, including laws and regulations, markets, stakeholders and technologies. The risk registers described 200 to 300 risks for each council, and that was a bit overwhelming for some councils, or probably all councils, who struggled to integrate such a comprehensive assessment into existing risk registers, which tended to address climate risks at a much higher level. And so it was recognised that the integration of climate risk assessment, which is inherently place-based, with council asset management, which is asset class-based, would be really difficult. And this led to a lot of conversations between the partners where we took the approach of developing a geoportal to spatially display which assets were at risk. And I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. So these are the asset classes that were piloted, that we tested. So each council selected one. It was Holdfast Bay selected open space, Marion was major buildings, Mitcham was bridges, and City of Onkaparinga was stormwater. And then each council also looked at roads. And those asset classes were selected on the basis of perceived exposure. Having good data on that class so that we could actually do the analysis, and also to ensure that a diversity of asset classes were represented. And roads was chosen as a common asset class because they represent so much of council's asset exposure and really do underpin the economic prosperity of our region. I think that it's easy to imagine how disruptive the loss of our road infrastructure would be to our communities. A geoportal was also developed, which provided a spatial analysis tool to enable partner councils to assess place-based risks to asset under each scenario. The value of the geoportal varied a bit depending on council risk profile and the existing asset management approach. The real limitation of the geoportal is that it represents a specific snapshot in time and isn't dynamic, so it can't be updated with new climate hazard layers or other information, nor readily integrated into council spatial systems. It does demonstrate a really useful approach, though, and I would suggest that this represents a prototype for a system that could be developed centrally and made available to all councils to integrate with their other GIS systems. The risk assessments were pretty comprehensive and made integration into existing risk management systems difficult due to that level of detail applied. So there's probably some lessons learned there as well. So now moving on to phase 3. Following the completion of phase 2, we had a midpoint review where we paused and compared what we had hoped to achieve with the work undertaken so far. As part of that, we had extensive discussions between the councils and with our delivery partners, and we recognised that we'd sort of got to a point where we needed to internalise that project management function because it was unrealistic to expect a non-council officer to be able to have the level of familiarity with our systems that was needed, and that an external party wasn't going to be able to be flexible enough for the demands of the project. It was also a bit complicated having one consultant managing a second consultant, so we internalised the project management at that time, and I took that on for the rest of the project. We had a lot of discussions with our delivery partner, Oricon, about how we would ensure that the final outputs would be readily utilisable by the councils. We ran into this issue of Oricon expecting to be able to utilise a placed or precinct-based approach, which is what you might expect from an engineering firm, whereas we required a systems-based approach that appreciated that the majority of council asset spend is on renewal rather than precinct-based development. When we develop new precincts or redevelop precincts, it's relatively straightforward to include climate at that time. When we're doing patchwork renewals and commissioning across a big network of roads or stormwater, that's a lot more challenging. As a part of those discussions, we negotiated to simplify the deliverables from the 4 council-specific and 1 regional asset resilience plan that we had initially envisaged to a single regional asset resilience plan. The preparation of a consolidated regional asset resilience plan for Southern Adelaide provides a holistic capture of the pilot's approach, findings and recommendations. So consolidating the findings and recommendations means that all the Resilient South partners benefit from the insights gathered through the asset-based investigations. And it does demonstrate that the impacts will vary council by council. We haven't got final approval to release the asset resilience plan yet, but I hope to receive this shortly and put that up on our website so that everyone can have a look. Following the completion of the asset resilience plan, we engaged BRM Advisory to undertake an external evaluation of the RAMP pilot, and there is a summary of that available on the Resilient South website, resilientsouth.com/ramp. So please have a look at that. I'll also be sharing this presentation on that website as well. So what did we achieve? We really catalyzed some important conversations here. There was, I think, a big disconnect with different parts of council about some of the way in which these systems worked in with each other and how we could actually start to change these systems. And in many cases, it's going to be a million small changes rather than a single big change that's going to lead to the kind of reform that we need. Certainly improved awareness and focus, and having been part of this journey for nearly the entire project now, I've really seen a step change in the terminology used, the awareness of the systems that we're all using at our different councils, and our maturity in that space. We really illuminated the variability in asset management, and that is not surprising when you consider the differences between our councils compared between, say, the city of Holdfast Bay, which is a relatively small council and only has a couple of asset staff, compared to the city of Onkaparinga, which has entire teams of asset managers. We talked a lot about the options and discovered options that were available to us. In many cases, we're still not quite at the ability to be able to figure out which of those we're going to go down, but we've certainly identified some short-term options that we can pursue. But understanding the options that are available to us gives us a lot more power to be able to come up with good solutions and to be able to do that early rather than in a reactive way when disaster or financial crisis strikes. And it really helped to set realistic expectations and highlight the need for continued investment. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So what did we learn? Lots and lots and lots and lots. Asset resilience is complex and it takes time to get the scope and project design right. This is really true, and I think that our early scoping of this project probably underestimated that. There was probably a need to have a better understanding of some of what we were dealing with before we embarked on this work in a wholesale way, but we were able to pick up a lot of that along the way and start to satisfy that, which was great. Asset management reform requires really wide engagement. It takes a lot of active input from both asset and sustainability professionals, as well as lots of other parts of council as well. And I'm talking here about governance professionals, finance professionals, and so on. Asset management decisions are often quite political, and they are complicated. Many asset decisions are locked in for years to come, and our ability to be able to change those based on new information can be limited. So there's lots and lots of discussion needed to figure out where the best parts to tinker with that system are. Change is really hard. It takes plenty of staff time and money to do that. Any change management process is hard, and the importance of both leveraging regional collaboration and doing that detailed work locally was really shown by this project. We chose to undertake the RAMP at a regional scale, which meant that we were all moving together and could hold each other to account. But at times, it became clear that we needed to pause that and say, okay, each council now has some work to do internally to be able to make sure that they're understanding their own systems and doing that work. So being able to operate at those two scales simultaneously is tricky, but we did benefit from that. And moving between that regional and local level is going to be, I think, useful in taking this forward. And there is a need to be flexible here. It's really difficult due to the complexity of these systems to be able to plan it out as a linear project from the start. Building flexibility and iteration into the project plan and resourcing constraints is really important when tackling change management and complex problems. And that includes bringing all of your stakeholders, including your executives, along on the journey. And it takes a village. We've had so many people working on this project, at least a dozen from each council, plus great staff from URPS, Oricon, the CSIRO, Value Advisory Partners, BRM Advisory, and elsewhere. And I really appreciate those that have contributed, particularly the ones who did it for free. I think that we've built something quite useful. Overall, this work really is a marathon and not a sprint, and we probably underestimated that at the outset. The creation, maintenance, and renewal of assets is where councils spend most of their money, and it can be highly political. Working out better ways to do that, which incorporate the best data we have, is always going to be an ongoing and iterative process. But one way or another, it's a journey that every organisation that manages a council is taking, because even if they choose to do nothing, that is making a decision in itself, and locking in probably suboptimal outcomes. I'm really proud of the work that we've undertaken so far, and I'm really looking forward to the next steps on this journey. I'd encourage everyone to have a look at the summary and other material that's available on the Resilient South website, on that link there. So what's next for us? So we're in a process now of re-engaging with our leadership, and promoting the findings, seminars like this, and taking stock of the achievements and working through the next best step. And I think that will mean that we undertake work within each council for a little while before figuring out where it makes sense to work together again. We also have been working with CSIRO now for a few years, and they have received some funding to continue to work with us through a project called the ERAD, the Enabling Resilience Asset Design. Thank you, Rebecca. And that project will be focused on road corridor assets within the city of Holdfast Bay, and we're still scoping that out with them. But that's a really exciting project, which will likely have strong resonance for all of the councils, because we all do share those road corridors. And certainly with some of the development projections that we see under the GARP and the urban greening strategy and other documents, being able to influence how we manage our road corridors is one of the best things that we can do for the ongoing resilience of our communities. So that's an exciting next step. Thank you to everyone for your participation, and I look forward to updating you all with future RAMP news in the future.
Beautiful. Thank you, Stefan. Thanks for a great presentation. That's a lot of work condensed into a 30-minute presentation. If you've got the questions for Stefan and as well for the other presentations, please post them into the chat. We'll do our best to answer them in the time that we have. There's no questions up there now, so we'll move on. So please post them if you do have any thoughts. I'd just like to pass on to we have a joint presentation actually from Anna Rogers and Vince Sakari from Charles Sturt Council, who are going to present on their climate risk in asset management processes at that council. So I'm happy to share sharing rights. Yes, there you go. It's up on the screen. We'll just get rid of Stefan for a minute. What's happened? Why have you gone up there, Stefan? Anna Rogers sharing screen. Beautiful. Okay. Over to you, Anna. Thanks very much. Are you on mute? We'll just get you to unmute first. There we go.
Sorry, Andrew.
All good.
Can
Go
you
for
see
it.
my screen okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Stefan. That was such a great presentation. It's the first time I've really sort of seen where RAMP got to, and although what I'm going to talk to you today feels a little different in scale, I was hearing a lot of very similar kind of findings and insights, which would be great to share with you today. You'll also just notice that it's not just me on the bill. I'll hand over shortly to my colleague Vince Sakari, who'll share a glimpse of the asset analytics and GIS capabilities that his team brings to our council. It's a seriously powerful skill set that's helped make this work possible. Before we dive in, I want to share a quote that's really stuck with me. Calling it climate change is rather limiting. I would rather call it the everything change. And that's from Margaret Atwood, for any book lovers out there, the author of The Handmaid's Tale. And I think it captures exactly why we're here. At Sturt, we've seen that climate change touches everything: assets, finance, community health, procurement, planning. Nothing sits in a silo. That's why we've taken a cycle of learning approach to resilience. This isn't a one-off project, it's a systems journey, one where we keep testing, refining, and scaling what works. Sturt, we've approached climate risk integration as a cycle of learning, starting with what we do well, testing ideas, and refining as we go. We're using asset management as a tool to build resilience, taking practical steps that connect our data, processes, and governance. So apologies to those who've seen me present before. Yes, that's governance heat map again. But for those I haven't met, this climate risk and governance assessment was first led by the City of Onkaparinga, and now most, if not all, metro councils have done it. This heat map became my roadmap. We were strong on strategy and asset planning, but had clear gaps in finance and risk. That contrast showed us exactly where to focus. It reinforced the need to reframe climate change as a corporate risk, with big implications for financial sustainability, strategic direction, and liability exposure. That message was coming through clearly from the emerging TCFD framework and from legal advice we received from Sarah Barker, a global expert on climate risk. So legally, we know that climate risks are material and foreseeable. So we set a goal to align with the TCFD pillars, and I began focusing on how to better identify our risks and quantify and budget for the cost of our response. At the time, sustainability elements were often the first to be de-scoped, seen as too costly. But at a turning point came when our former finance manager, Annette Martin, said to me, "If you want funding, get it into the AMPs." And that became the catalyst. So I've come to learn we have an absolute gun assets team. We've been investing in asset management capability for years. Our asset register is solid, our condition data is current, and we've built strong internal processes around life cycle planning. Our GIS and spatial systems are also really well developed. They let us see our assets in context across our city. That foundation was key. It gave us the confidence and capability to take this next step. So as part of applying a climate lens, we wanted to understand what hazards our assets were actually exposed to. We used downscaled climate projections from the state government and combined them with localised data sets. Some we developed with our Adapt2S partners, others we procured directly. These included urban heat maps, flood modelling, sea level rise and coastal erosion mapping, and inundation modelling for areas like West Lakes. We integrated all of it into our GIS, giving us spatial visibility across asset classes. That's helped us bring climate intelligence into our forward planning so we can see where our physical risks lie across the city. From an emissions point of view, previously we've focused on reducing Scope 1 and 2 emissions, primarily through energy and fuel efficiency in our buildings and fleet, and this work laid a solid foundation. However, our maturity stepped up when we undertook our first full emissions inventory, including Scope 3. This comprehensive approach revealed that our long-life, high-materiality assets, like roads and footpaths, were significant contributors to our emissions profile. This insight shifted our perspective. Asset management isn't just about costs, it's a critical lever in our climate response strategy. And now we have a dedicated role for carbon accounting and emission reduction strategy, my colleague Bethany Loates. So thank goodness for others, pioneering folks who are giving this all a crack, as there really is no playbook to follow. We're all writing it. Early in our journey, I engaged with our assets teams and we tuned into a webinar hosted by the City of Adelaide and IPWEA about their practice notes 12.1 and 12.2. Their research on how climate change affects the expected useful life of infrastructure and consequently depreciation modelling was eye-opening. We also learned how different materials respond to specific climate hazards. This knowledge became our foundation for integrating climate risks into our asset management plans. We also benefited from the Resilient South's RAMP project, and early on I asked Stefan if our Manager of Asset Planning, Chris Shallow, could join as an observer to bring insights back to the Adelaide West region. Stefan graciously included him, keeping us connected to this powerful regional collaboration. Some of Chris's reflections from RAMP have helped us validate our sort of bottom-up approach and reinforce that we're all in this journey together and that collaboration is the key to progress. So this question became a real turning point for us. It captured the core challenge. We had identified climate risks and emissions hotspots, but how do we translate that into shaping scopes, asset decisions, and budget priorities? How do we make the case for climate resilient design choices in our forward works programs, especially when those elements are often the first to be cut? These questions drove us into the next phase, testing and adapting our approach. So to begin answering that question, I partnered with one of our senior asset analysts, Tony Hinton, who brings around 30 years of local government experience and a deep understanding of how asset programs are built, scoped and delivered. Together, we developed a spreadsheet tool to test a more structured approach. We started with the open space AMP, which is sort of Tony's specialty. For each asset class, we applied a two-part lens. First, following IPWEA's guidance, we assessed how hazards like extreme heat or flooding might affect useful life and asset condition. Then we layered in emissions data along with other council sustainability objectives such as circular economy indicators like recycled content and end-of-life recyclability. We conducted a business as usual baseline assessment based on our typical product selections, then compared it to options with lower carbon footprints and greater climate resilience. The spreadsheet incorporated per unit rates and volumes, aligning with our budget forecasting. So we examined both CapEx and OpEx impacts. This open space AMP integration was our pilot, and the framework worked well for these assets. However, we uncovered many knowledge gaps, mostly due to market maturity and our own uncertainties around the best materials and design solutions. We also approached Anna Panel from URPS to undertake a peer review of our approach, knowing her extensive experience and links to RAMP. And this was a really valuable process. Our goal was to apply this lens across all 7 of our asset management plans, covering buildings, roads, water infrastructure, open space, fleet, IT and public lighting. But we quickly learned that each asset class is planned differently with its own assumptions, data sources and decision drivers. A one-size-fits-all approach wouldn't work. We needed to tailor the method to suit each asset type. So I'll just briefly run you through some key focus areas that were uncovered across or from this process. In our open space AMP, we focused on playground, our highest cost assets in this category, and critical community infrastructure, especially in a warming climate with both older and younger users relying on them. I reached out to Professor Hassan Shafiri from the University of Adelaide with an idea for a partnership, which he was enthusiastic about. It evolved into an experiential design studio for master's students who and their challenge was to reimagine climate resilient and low carbon playgrounds. We gained innovative design concepts and access to embodied carbon data that otherwise we couldn't have had access to. And now our asset designers are better informed about how design choices, materials and procurement strategies can support these outcomes. For our buildings AMP, we embedded our ESD requirements into the renewal process using cost guidance from the Green Building Council of Australia. This gave us a realistic cost differential to work from, and a clearer path for embedding climate resilience into delivery. This approach has already supported projects like Natonga Henley, where we've achieved many of the climate resilience outcomes outlined in our ESD requirements. It's also shaping several upcoming sporting club renewals, where these principles are now central to the way we plan and scope our building projects. And we have an AMP that supports these endeavours financially. As part of our fleet AMP, we developed a calculator to assess the cost benefit of transitioning to electric passenger vehicles. So far, our fleet includes 15 battery electric vehicles, 4 plug-in hybrids, and 35 hybrids. The heavy vehicle forecasting remains a challenge, but it's firmly on our radar. Our IT is now taking a closer look at life cycle and replacement planning for our technology assets. We also uncovered a procurement risk we hadn't considered. Our cloud provider's data centre is located in a floodplain in New South Wales, a surprising but valuable lesson in understanding climate risks across our value chain. Our public lighting AMP has had a strong focus on energy efficiency, and our transition to LEDs is now almost complete, which is a great achievement, and thanks to Carmen D'Amico and his team for leading that. They're now turning their attention to emerging issues like wildlife-friendly lighting to further align with our sustainability and biodiversity goals. Our water infrastructure AMP builds on strong foundations. Our stormwater managers already have a costed plan in place to address flood risk across most of our city. But we identified gaps where further planning is needed, particularly in areas not yet modelled or costed. One key priority that emerged from our process was the need for a power resilience study for our stormwater pump stations, critical assets that must remain operational during extreme events and not fail due to power outages. For roads, the primary climate risk we identified wasn't from physical hazards, it was the high Scope 3 emissions associated with the materials and construction. This insight led to the development of our low carbon roads and footpaths tool, co-designed with partner councils and funded through the LGA Research and Development Scheme. The tool supports early design interventions to reduce embodied carbon in road and footpath projects. So importantly, we embedded these climate risk assessments or assumptions into each of our AMPs and had them endorsed by council, creating a financial signal in our long-term planning. As everyone on this call will appreciate, our business is broad and varied. And as we worked through each AMP, what emerged was bigger than technical fixes. I began to see the scale of risks coming at us and the potential magnitude of cost and strategic impact this could have for both council and our city. What we lacked was a holistic view. These insights were sitting in siloed asset management plans, not connected across the organisation. So that realisation is now shaping our next step. We're now stepping into the next layer of maturity, defining what climate risk means for our council, not just financially, but in terms of the community outcomes we exist to deliver. We're aligning this work with TCFD and the incoming ASRS requirements, ensuring climate risk management is a core part of our risk and investment decision making. As we develop our new city plan in response to the housing supply challenges of the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan, we're aiming to centralise and clearly articulate Council's climate risk response within this broader city vision. I'm genuinely excited about this next phase and grateful for the strong support from management as we evolve our climate risk governance maturity. The outcomes will better inform our next AMP reviews, giving us a clearer direction on the level of risk we're managing, which will directly shape and prioritise our asset investments. So what started as a budgeting challenge has become a systems journey. We've learned that good data and processes are necessary, but not enough. Strategic clarity is essential to drive consistent, confident decisions. Most importantly, this work doesn't need to be perfect to start. Each round of testing builds maturity and strengthens our foundation. This truly is the everything change, and that means everyone has a role to play. Our learning cycles helped us surface risks, unlock opportunities, and build the muscle need for what lies ahead. So before I hand over to my colleague Vince, I just want to leave you with this powerful quote from Brene Brown. There is no innovation and creativity without failure. This work, our journey in climate risk and resilience, is no different. It takes courage to experiment and try new approaches. And sometimes things don't land perfectly the first time, but that's exactly how we build resilience. We learn from setbacks, adapt our approach, and grow stronger with every cycle. Over here to you, Vince.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'll just get my... Okay, just confirming that everyone can see that.
Thanks, Vince.
Excellent. Again, I just want to thank Anna. Anna is truly the glue here in Charles Sturt. Her vision and her passion in this space is something that's just admired by many, and just her passion is quite contagious. The support from our asset manager Chris Shallow and our senior asset scheduler Tony Hinton really are the biggest drivers, and then of course my team of geospatial technical analysts just make this all work. We get these ideas, we know where data can be put together, what tools to use, and we make some great things out of it. So let's look at some exciting maps that we've compiled together. All right. Just not getting the controls. Oh, here we go. Now we got it. Okay, so tree canopy. Where in this plantable space map, what we've done, we've leveraged some multi-source data that can enhance urban greening effects, particularly in identifying tree canopy plantable spaces, asset vulnerability to climate change, and how to mitigate risks to the services used by our community. This particular model highlights the thermal day surface mapping, which uses thermal imagery to identify those urban heat islands, areas that experience higher temperatures due to human activities and infrastructure. This data was sourced by the 2022 Green Adelaide Coordinated Urban Heat and Tree Canopy Mapping Project, so we thank them for that. This data helps pinpoint areas where increasing tree canopy can mitigate heat, improving urban comfort and resilience. The tree canopy planting streets can identify strategic locations for new tree plantings, focusing on areas with low existing canopy and high pedestrian activity. The recycled water distribution network, you can see in pink, purple, network, and the drip irrigated reserves that we can just see. We're highlighting some reserves linked to that. Details of supplies recycled water for non-portable includes users, including irrigation of public green spaces. Integrating tree planting initiatives with the recycled water network ensures sustainable water use, particularly important in Adelaide's dry climate. Planning tree planting locations in proximity to the recycled water network can optimize resource use and maintain efficiencies. Drip irrigated systems deliver water directly to plant roots, minimizing evaporation and water waste. In urban settings such as metro reserves, drip irrigation supports the health of newly planted trees and vegetations, especially during our dry periods. Combining drip irrigation with recycled water use increases the sustainable urban greening practices. Okay, another example, like a project like the Glen Eagles Reserve Stormwater Upgrade, aim to improve flood management and stormwater capacity. As part of the West Lakes Stormwater Management Plan, recent investigations identified that neighbouring properties around Glen Eagles Reserve were at increased flood risks during a 5% AEP, or 1 in 20 year ARI event. To address this, a detention basin is being proposed within the reserve. The basin will temporarily store stormwater during heavy rainfall events, helping to reduce the peak flows and mitigate flood impacts on adjacent residential areas. Another thing that we've done is our biodiversity mapping. This is a developing initiative, not perfect, but very simple and just spatially enabling this initiative. So it's focusing on mapping biodiversity within our coastal dunes, with an emphasis on identifying rare plant species, fox dens, and weed infestations. Sparked by a growing interest in GIS by one of our field operators, the project began with self-taught data captured in Excel. As the value of structured spatially referenced data became clear, support was sought from the asset analytics team to transition the effort into a GIS platform. Ongoing opportunities exist. I should have played that. Ongoing opportunity. Sorry about that. Ongoing opportunities exist to continue capturing field observations, monitor growth and movement over time, and integrate this data into a scheduled maintenance program or programs. Supporting proactive management and long-term ecological resilience, this work also presents a strong case for potential grant funding aimed at environmental monitoring, habitat restoration, and community-based conservation initiatives. And finally, our high leaf maintenance prevention on drains. The City of Chester implemented a targeted initiative to address the leaf litter and stormwater management in flood-prone areas. This program focuses on streets with deciduous trees, which can contribute significantly to leaf accumulation and stormwater infrastructure. Located within flood risk zones, we targeted leaf litter and storm water management to proactively manage the leaf litter and to prevent potential infrastructure failures. The city has developed a strategy to prioritize streets with deciduous trees. These trees are known for high leaf fall, increasing the risk of stormwater drainage blockage. Stormwater entry points, or SEPs, in flood risk areas are regularly inspected and conducted to address the capacity and condition of those assets, ensuring that they function effectively during peak rainfall events. This approach aims to mitigate flood risk and maintain integrity of the stormwater infrastructure. Infrastructure asset management. The city manages approximately 400 kilometres of drains, around 15,000 pit assets, 14 stormwater pump stations, and 21 detention basins, including our new ones. This is around $460 million plus of infrastructure. These assets are regularly assessed to inform maintenance and renewal planning, ensuring resilience against against flooding and efficient stormwater management. And that is me.
Cool. Thanks, Vince. And thanks to Anna as well. There was just one question just before we move on from Vera, I think, just for Anna. And Stefan, you might want to comment on this as well from the RAMP project management plan in terms of what scenario to use, or what did you use in terms of the climate projection scenarios, like SSP 3 to 7, or was it RCP 8.5 or whatever it was? Like, what scenarios did you use for your climate modelling? I don't know if Anna can answer that.
It's a good question. We've used the recommendation from the state government's climate projections in risk assessment guidance document for RCP 8.5. And we do sort of consider that can sometimes change depending on what modelling that we're doing. Our stormwater models have, I think, taken a lesser pathway at times. So, yeah, it is a little bit varied.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Stefan, did you have any comments to make on that one?
Yeah, I think that it's important to try and be as consistent as possible with the state government projections, and mindful of that things aren't looking good in terms of our mitigation objectives, and the latest projections that that the climate branch has provided from DEW are pretty grim. So I think that it's important that there's not a kind of an approach of taking rose-colored glasses and saying, oh, we're going to pick a higher a more optimistic scenario. I would be inclined to over-prepare rather than under-prepare, and that's what the best science is telling us at the moment. So looking to try and be consistent, but also as realistic as possible in our projections.
Thanks, Stefan. Wholeheartedly agree. Just one last question before we move on from Tanya. I'll excuse the typos, Tanya, it's fine. But I think you're asking, was it mainly the asset management plans where you plugged in the climate resilience assessment, or was that plugged into other asset management system points overall? Or was it really just your asset management plan that you did that for?
I think I understand the question. Yeah, I think we had a sort of working group across the different AMPs for this asset management plan review that was triggered after the last council election. And so I was trying to mirror and feed into how they were going about that next forecasting of like program of works. So it started off as a separate thing, but we were eventually sort of integrating much more into those working group discussions, and we were sort of documenting the climate risks and what the impact was to the program as we went. It kind of evolved. Yeah.
Cool. All right, thanks, Anna. Look, we'll move on. And our final speaker today is Maggie Hine. I'm sure that most of you know Maggie, but Maggie's the manager for city development at the City of Port Adelaide Enfield, and she's going to talk to us about the climate resilience infrastructure program that they've been working on for quite some time now. So over to you, Maggie. Thanks. Are you still on mute there, Maggie? Beautiful. And if you could just increase your screen through start presentation, that'd be great.
Okay. The world of Zoom when you start using Teams all the time. Thanks. Great presentations, Stefan, Vince, and Anna. I suppose this is slightly a different tact. It's not specifically talking about council-owned assets. It's an insight to what I've called the never-ending story. Just as Stefan talked about the ramp being a slow burn, certainly the work that's been happening with City Port Adelaide and other partners to address risks associated with coastal inundation in the Port River system. It's been at least 3 decades of work. So I'm just going to go a quick sort of backcast on things that have been done. And more recently, the work that was done in partnership with CSIRO and Value Advisory Partner as part of a national case study, and close with just a program that we're trying to advocate for and set up so that we've got some sort of structural arrangements in place to work with partners in addressing the issues. So some of you would have seen this cartoon. It probably was used when we did some work back in the 2010s. The issue of risks associated with sea level rise and coastal inundation in Port Adelaide are known.
Sorry, Maggie, that's not showing for us. That's
Isn't it?
still, no, these is
What about that one? Was that showing?
I think you're sharing the wrong screen.
Am I?
I think we're looking at the screen above.
Yeah.
The cartoon's the next one down. No, next one up, 2 up.
2 up. So is it the sharing screen that I've got wrong?
It's the wrong screen, I think. You're sharing your full PowerPoint, not the actual presentation.
Okay. How's that? Is that working?
can I just say I could see your PowerPoint, but you're on the wrong. I could see the cartoon was down the side of the different screen a minute ago. Now I'm just looking at you.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
We'll try again. Entire screen. Share. What's that looking like?
Better. Perfect.
Beauty.
Yep, that's a cartoon.
All right, we'll move beyond the cartoon, just in terms of the place. So obviously in the Lefevre Peninsula and Port Adelaide area, inner harbour, outer harbour, it's the location of a range of state and nationally significant infrastructure assets. And now Osborne being the location of the AUKUS nuclear submarine facility proposed in this peninsula as well. Key assets include 3 power stations supplying, a large percentage of SA's and the Metropolitan Adelaide's electricity. Key national natural gas pipelines, 2 key ones running through the peninsula. The Osborne Defence Facility that predates AUKUS, of course, had the submarine and frigate building program there. The Birkenhead fuel depots, Adelaide Brighton Cement, the international shipping terminal, sea freight terminal, and major rail and freight infrastructure, and of course an existing and established community with a whole lot of urban growth. So in that context, there are obviously a number of interests that need to be involved in addressing issues to mitigate the risks associated with coastal inundation and flooding. So what we've tried to do in terms of where we're moving now is more, there's certainly an evidence-based, but also systems-based, and moving from coastal protections to a resilience-based approach to addressing issues. So understanding exposure, vulnerability and risk, both current and future, and mitigation options, but really through a resilience lens. I'll touch on the work that we did as a part of a national case study, working with CSIRO. It's one of 2 national case studies, ours being due to flood hazards and the strategic assets within the area, and the other being Bega in New South Wales due to their fire risk, but also compounding impacts of flood risk as well. And then just close off with a bit of an overview of what we're calling the Climate Resilient Infrastructure Program, where it's an attempt to structure up a sort of a governance approach and a funding approach to take the work forward. But as I said, it's a never-ending story, and we're in for the long haul, and it's certainly decades of work thus far. So that work in terms of the evidence base, the first bit of work that happened was back in 2005, and some of you remember Verity Sanders, who worked at Port Adelaide Enfield then. That was a part funded between federal government under their national funding and state government and council to actually model and map seawater flooding and also stormwater flooding and the dynamic between that. I've just noted in the slide, you'll notice the sea level predictions that were pulled for that study were the IPCC third assessment report, and the sea level projections at that time, and they still do accord with what's prescribed in the Coastal Protection Act as well. Compounding that was also projected sea level land subsidence in the peninsula and Port Adelaide area, with water withdrawing from the aquifer system. So this obviously in any scenarios modelling, we have to actually include those parameters as well. The work taken from that flood study was then used to do a first pass assessment on the physical infrastructure in the inner harbour and outer harbour area, to look at the condition and then to identify a potential series of both soft and hard engineering upgrades and solutions across the system. That was not published work, 2003, but we've since used that in many settings. We've certainly used it in our own work when we've gone for grant funding, and officers have used it in their work in terms of coastal protection responses as well. In 2017, as part of the Adapt West Regional Program, Climate Change Adaptation Program, we also did some work at some key catchments in terms of climate change adaptation for the city of Port Adelaide Enfield. That was Gilman, which is a large employment land to the north of Grand Junction Road, which was also very vulnerable to coastal inundation with a seawall between the Port River and that yet undeveloped land, but it's also a salt marsh system, and it also takes a substantial amount of stormwater from both the City of Sturt and the City of Port Adelaide Enfield. So it has this sort of dynamic between coastal inundation and stormwater flooding as well, and then the need to maintain that system and upgrade that system based on the projections and the risks, the known risks. What I'll talk to briefly is that while we had all this evidence and work that was done through some of the program responses, it was very evident that we needed to update that data. And in 2020, Murray Townsend, who then worked for the Department of Environment and Water, actually led a process for us to get funding to update the sea flood modelling and mapping, and to undertake an impact assessment using the University of Adelaide's unharmed product to understand risk for Port Adelaide and surrounds. That was $250,000 from the first round of the Disaster Ready Fund. Dew have led that project. That is hydrodynamic modelling, but sea level rise only. It doesn't deal with the dynamic, the stormwater system. And it's yet unpublished and yet unfinished, but will eventually find its way to the flood viewer. And obviously using updated data and scenarios with the outputs on the flood viewer. Just to go back to the 2005 and the 2013 information, the image on the left is the mapping product that mapped out the flood extent and depths under a number of scenarios. The pink or purple area was what we called scenario 4. That was 100 years of subsidence with 880 millimetres of sea level rise, and looking at the extent if there was no further intervention or upgrade to existing infrastructure. The image on the right is an extract from the 2013 seawall study that basically captured a little bit of the existing infrastructure, its condition, its height, some constraints and issues relevant to each of the physical pieces of infrastructure, and recommended upgrades to deal with mitigating the potential inundation risks that were identified in the 2005 study, and then a prioritisation. We are still using this data. It's not yet been updated, but obviously once we've got the updated hydrological data with the 2005 project, then it's time to revisit this information as well. Based on all the prior studies, in 2021-22, the CSRO and Value Advisory Partners got money federally to do a bit of what they called a sprint testing of their enabling resilient investment framework. And this framework is very much trying to capture the elements of place, how people organise, governance, organise themselves in terms of governance, understanding how they build resilience into their communities, their systems, their places, their physical infrastructure, and how they position themselves best to actually attract the funding and the finance to ensure that they can maintain that resilience as well. So it was really that process. It was a rapid fire process for us. It used the modelling and mapping data that I've just mentioned. And it was very much focused on, while the ERI methodology is about bringing all stakeholders into the process, for the PAE context, it was very much about bringing the government stakeholders into the process. Because it's a multi-agency response, it's an intergovernmental response, and it's probably no surprises to anyone on this Zoom call, that coordination piece and who takes the lead in that process is not a simple thing. So what ERI actually assisted in doing was, with CSIRO and VAP's assistance, they brought in the likes of Renewal SA, Department of Transport, Council, and they attempted to bring in other state government agencies. Infrastructure SA certainly were a lead in bringing the parties to the process as well. The case study focused on identifying opportunities for mitigation based on known information, looking at hazards, and use what I'll just go through a beneficiary and a value creation and value capture methodology rather than a traditional risk methodology where you identify damage costs and then methods to avoid those costs. And then took us through a process to look at potential funding mechanisms based on beneficiary model. What funding mechanisms and investment pathways could be used to fund those resilience infrastructure investments. The outcomes, I suppose, was really much an improved understand what is required to enable resilient investments, and that outcome is there's no easy answer. I think in terms of the learnings for us, you're in it for the long haul. When it comes to intergovernmental approaches, it needs leadership. For local government, we've had to be very careful. For council, we've had to be very careful that we don't overreach our role as well. It's very much as we are one asset owner, we're also a beneficiary, but we have a key advocacy role to play for our community and businesses in the area as well. And it's certainly how to start building competencies and leading some practice as well. But I still say we have a long way to go. So the methodology of ERA, this is an extract from the report, so I'll show the link in the next slide. But it stepped us through in a workshop setting with agencies and council staff drawn from mostly city assets and our key planning areas. We're looking at just mapping out and understanding what were the opportunities that arose as a result of mitigation or adaptation options actually put in place. So if you put a seawall in place at X to mitigate the risk, what were the opportunities, current and future, that were potentially derived from that? So you might be able to then do a pedestrian path upgrade because it's no longer getting flooded. Your bus network, your route networks are still able to operate. And you may, in fact, get opportunities for future investment in those areas. And that's played out for Port Adelaide, to be honest, in particular areas where we have done improvements. There may be new commercial opportunities, but a real focus on what those community opportunities are as well in terms of the benefits from a social, environmental and an economic improvement point of view. And the other one from property and development in the Inner Harbour area in particular, there were areas that in terms of development potential were compromised if the flood mitigation measures were not put in place. There's a live example of that in the Inner Harbour at the moment. So it was just a fast pass exercise to quantify that and map out what those opportunities are, then to understand who benefits from those opportunities and what the benefits are. So what the benefits are, and then mapping out the value capture and who's the beneficiary. And that process would then took you on to a fast mapping. If those once you know the beneficiaries, what are some of the mechanisms that can be used to derive the funding base to actually fund the mitigation measures? I'd have to say that this pushed us. It was a 4-month, very fast process. And when we presented this to elected members, the value creation and capture methodology, there was quite a bit of debate about it in the workshop setting. In terms of understanding the importance of suitable levels of public infrastructure funding for risk mitigation, but also what that then means for how you interact with the private sector and who bears the risk as well. So I think one of the learnings for those of us that went through this process was really just broadening our frame of mind about what was possible. It was complex. The products from the ERA exercise, you can access them online, both Bega's and City of Port Adelaide Enfield. It's quite a comprehensive document. There's a lot of detail in it. But we did then work with CSIRO and VAP and Infrastructure SA and DEW. Infrastructure SA led this work to put a submission into Infrastructure Australia in 2022, seeking for Port Adelaide to actually be listed on the national priorities for infrastructure investment for resilient coastal infrastructure. What happened in that submission process? It went through the first stage, and the second stage, the criticism was that the data that we were using was dated, the 2005 data, and we used that information to then get the funding for the update to the flood mapping and the flood modelling. But again, a very important exercise, and bringing both state and government, different agencies from state government and council together, looking at the shared priorities. But in that submission to Infrastructure Australia, that was very much a state-led process. Again, what we took from the ERA process, we took quite a bit of the learning and the information and pulling on our prior work as well. We successfully secured 2.1 million under the then, it was Preparing Australia Local Communities, I think, grant. It's a predecessor to the Disaster Ready Fund, to fund two, I suppose, project settings. One that was actually demonstrating the design and construction of resilient infrastructure, and that was the living shoreline. So a soft engineering solution in part of the system for the new Yipti Yatapultiki, which is the new Aboriginal Cultural Centre in the Inner Harbour area. I'll show a couple of graphics of that in a minute. It's now constructed. We secured 1.9 million for that design and construction, and that was a beautiful confluence of both cultural restoration, ecological restoration, and climate resilience, where the shoreline was designed through to 2100 scenarios to ensure that it was able to cope with those. So it took out a very old hard pit of infrastructure and created a far more ecologically sensitive and culturally sensitive shoreline. The other bit of money that we got was to support really refining the governance arrangements and funding arrangements to sort of enable investment in disaster risk reduction infrastructure for the system. And again, this is important. This part is very important about what role council would take in this. It's much more of a facilitative advocacy role. And the success of that, the Project B, the CRIP, really relies on good collaboration and leadership from all levels of government. So Yipti Yatapultiki, if you haven't been down to it, this is just a graphic showing, I hope you see the cursor. The living shoreline this was the first sort of concept diagram. This is what we put into our funding bid. This used to be a hard seawall, and this through the shoreline creation is now a soft engineering solution, mangrove re-establishment, and it's also designed with to be culturally sensitive as well in terms of how it relates back to the spaces within the overall Aboriginal Cultural Centre and the building and the soft landscaping as well. This is an early concept, and if you go down to the site, you'll see it's actually now in place, and this is the living shoreline that's extended back. So the last 2 months when we had high tides, we've had and the storm events, we've seen the water come up to here. It's coped very well under those high levels, those events. But yeah, we were able to take the ERI work and actually use that in the grant funding for this particular part of the Yipti Yatapultiki development. CRIP, this is just an overview of a sort of way of explaining the bits of work, the bits of jigsaw, a whole lot of inputs to CRIP, the evidence base that identifies the hazards, the exposure, the vulnerability and risk, including the ERI case study product, the updated modelling, the new CHAP guidelines, the climate hazard adaptation planning guidelines, the seawall study, and also the Gilman study that I mentioned. The elements that we've got some funding for, there's 30,000 we got from Coast Protection Board to assist with developing an initial stakeholder engagement for development of the governance model. We'll just look at case studies that are relevant to an estuary system, which is developed subject to urban development and is similar typology to the Port River system. There's a whole lot of program management and advocacy, and then just retesting those mitigation and adaptation options, and then the work around developing the resilient infrastructure business cases. Unfunded is next phase, and we also probably need to get further funding to do this first phase of work as well. I'll stop there. Just a quick snapshot.
Awesome stuff, Maggie. There's quite a lot of work in there. If you want to stop sharing your screen, thank you.
Stop sharing. Yeah.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you. And just, I'm going to ignore Stefan's comment there, whether the greatest threat to the CRIP is the Bloods. Or
The what?
The CRIP is the Bloods. Unless there's any other questions, we've got a couple of minutes if people want to post their questions, but I had one for Maggie. Just, well, you haven't talked about anything about community, I guess, engagement and communications regarding that study. There's some pretty strong data in there and pretty scary data in that modelling. Could you just talk through very briefly any of the community engagement, or when you make those public, how do you deal with that at industry, commercial, public investment level, let alone government levels?
Yeah, I think we're going back. Certainly when the first information, the 2005 study was done, it was released. It was also happening at a time when I think the federal government were releasing the Coast Adapt modelling as well, the bathtub modelling. So that was hitting the public. And I certainly know Charles Sturt, you had a little bit of scary stuff that went out to the media at the same time. So we've had to work out how we respond to the media response to that information. But we also do have in Port Adelaide, I think we're very lucky. We've got pretty smart community groups that have organised around this issue as well, like the Estuary Care Foundation and now Friends of Port River. There's some formalised groups that are quite solution focused, but they are very frustrated at the speed of things happening. And I think we're probably going to come up into a period where they'll start their own advocacy about why is this not happening faster, and what role, what leadership is on council and state government doing to address the issues. But I think the AUKUS, so what we've certainly done since AUKUS has come online is through the Office of AUKUS in state government, DPC, and the Australian Submarine Agency, they've just completed a master planning process for Lefevre Peninsula, and we've tried our best to advocate for the CRIP and the hazard management response, the resilience response, to be built into that master plan. But yeah, for the community, they've been engaged at different points of time, but I expect they're going to be very frustrated about the speed at which things are happening, because floods happen and we haven't had a big event and we haven't yet had a disaster. But the disaster will come if we don't invest in the mitigation and the adaptation now.
Yeah. And just quickly, one last question from Lara. Thinking back to Anna's presentation on asset management planning, just wondering if PAE have had similar considerations in embedding climate risk information into financial modelling for assets at that level in your systems at all.
I would say we're not as advanced. I think Anne Gibbons is online, but we're not as advanced as Anna's work. We've certainly shared some of the base information in the early phases through the AdaptWest relationship, but we certainly are not as advanced as Anna's work. And my reflection listening to the two other presentations is, with CRIP, there's probably an opportunity to go back to a better understanding of who owns what asset, and a bit of an asset management asset planning and asset management approach to things as well.
Sure. All right. We're dead on 3:30, so we're going to end it there. Just wanted to thank, obviously, Stefan, Anna, Vince, and Maggie for their time today in presenting some work and case studies on climate resilience and asset management. And I want to thank you all for your time today. As Stefan mentioned, we'll have the recording available through the Resilience South website, I believe, and we'll get that up as soon as we can. So thank you for your time, and I hope you have all a good afternoon. Sorry,
Andrew,
Stefan?
just before everyone disappears, very conscious that the ramp has been eagerly awaited by a lot of people outside of the Resilient South region. And if people have questions, they want to talk about all of it, we really are happy to share more information with you. If you'd like to sit and have a coffee and talk about how things went and talk about other outputs, whatever it might be, very happy. Our door's always open. So please get in touch.
Right.
And thanks again to Andrew for facilitating today, and everyone for your interest.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Stefan. Yes, please drop us a line, drop Stefan a line. Always happy to chat about this moving forward. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.
Thank you.